Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. Our shows tonight features a couple of guests from national community radio. One is Portland's own Doug McVay, who works with KBOO, and the other is Dean Becker in Houston, Texas, who works with KPFT down there, part of the Pacific Radio Network. We'll be talking more about that a little bit later. We have a very short but sweet hemp news segment tonight. So without further ado, let's bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first hemp news story tonight is from Washington, D.C. Members of the United States Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs voted on Wednesday, September 27th, this week, to advance legislation, the Safer Banking Act, which allows financial institutions to more readily establish relationships with state-licensed cannabis businesses. Although members of the House have passed an earlier version of this legislation, the Safe Banking Act, on 7 prior occasions, today's vote marks the first time that the United States Senate members have voted in favor of the measure. Lawmakers, advocates, stakeholders across the spectrum are reacting to Wednesday's committee passage of a bipartisan marijuana banking bill, with Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer pledging to bring it to the floor of the U.S. Senate very soon, and a group of 4 GOP senators vowing to kill the legislation. Just before the Senate Banking Committee approved the Secure and Fair Enforcement Regulations, Safer Banking Act, Schumer committed to bring the bill to the floor for a vote as soon as possible. Marijuana businesses' lack of access to these necessary financial services create serious threats to the safety of cannabis consumers and the employees that serve them, limits transparency and accountability for those operating in this legal industry, and severely hinders the ability of small businesses to effectively compete with the underground market and with larger, well-funded companies. A diverse group of commercial and advocacy organizations, including the National Conference of State Legislatures, the American Bar Association, the NAACP, and the American Bankers Association, backed this legislation. Federal law discourages banks and other financial institutions from maintaining these relationships with cannabis businesses because marijuana remains classified as a Schedule I controlled substance. In fact, I have had my bank accounts closed in helping medical marijuana patients 20 different times starting in 2007. And out of those 20 different bank closures, once for 26 accounts at once, the bank would not tell me why they were closing my account. Only twice did they say it was because I help medical marijuana patients. Anyway, our last story tonight's from Ohio. Roughly 3 out of 5 Ohio voters support a marijuana legalization measure that will appear on November's ballot. According to data in a new poll, nearly 2/3 of respondents say they believe legalization in Ohio is inevitable. With less than 2 weeks before widespread early voting kicks off in Ohio, 55% of the respondents say they will definitely or probably vote yes on legalization, while 34% say they would definitely or probably oppose it. Only about 11% remain undecided. This survey of 843 likely Ohio voters was commissioned by the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol and conducted by the FM3 Research Group. All told, including those who lean yes, 59% of respondents favored passage of Issue 2, which would legalize and regulate marijuana for adults 21 and older in Ohio. That's the end of our hemp news segment tonight. If you or a loved one are looking for a doctor who can help you obtain a medical marijuana permit, whether it's in Ohio, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, or anywhere else, give us a call at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. Thanks for watching and work to restore hemp. Good night.
It's my great pleasure to introduce one fellow I've known for going on 40 years now almost, Mr. Doug McVay, here in Portland now again, and Dean Becker in Houston, Texas. Dean has been producing daily shows for the Drug Truth Network for about 20 some odd years?
22
years. And
next week.
Doug, you are now working with the Prison Pipeline Collective in educating people about issues regarding that and drug abuse. You've also been working with, is it Common Sense for Drug Information? I know.
Drug policy. Well, in fact, we've transferred that one. Drug Policy Facts, the website that for years Drug War Facts, and then we've expanded our view, and we've also shifted the focus a little bit. It's now a project of the Real Reporting Foundation, and the sister site is called World Health Systems Facts, which is it's very much similar to Drug Policy Facts, except we have sections on, at the moment, 17 different nations, including the U.S., and it's an examination of the health systems and a little bit about the economic and political systems too, but really looking at the healthcare systems, outcomes, expenditures, how they run, and why it is well, we don't do the analysis. That's for that's for you folks. But what exactly? Basically, it gives you the numbers. We spend more than any per capita than any other country, and we get worse outcomes than most everyone else in the OECD. It's pretty sad.
We being the USA.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. So, Dean, tell us about the Drug Truth Network. And I've been honored to be a guest on your show several times. And I know you and Doug have been working together for many, many years. And I thought it'd be good to get you guys on talking about your audio. Nowadays, everybody says you're doing a podcast. We started so long ago, it wasn't, they didn't even have podcasts back then, so me, it's still a cable access television show. And you're on KPFT in Houston, is that correct?
Right, KPFT in Houston, one of the 5 Pacifica sister stations. We're also affiliated with dozens of broadcast stations around North America, mostly on the West Coast, but a lot up in New England. And then we have, I think, 2 or 4 up in Canada still. At one time, we had about 135 broadcast stations in North America. And that number has diminished significantly because when we first began this, and especially when I first began broadcasting almost 22 years ago, I was the only person doing it. And there was many people that were glad to have the additional news reporting so they didn't have their local police looking at them. And that was why we had such a large number in the beginning. In the meantime, lots of other folks have developed the courage or the knowledge, the ability to speak boldly in their own community. And that's why our numbers have dropped, but we still have a lot of great supporters, don't we, Doug?
We do. And, part of it too is that a lot of community stations are trying to get more local content, which is where some of those new shows are coming from. But Century of Lies is still on a good 12 different stations. And of course, it's a podcast and a direct download. It's on all the different services. But every public affairs show that gets done is a podcast or a direct download. Yeah. The big difference is that we're actually part of a radio station. Think of it as a curated collection of really high quality, very informative, very well done shows, podcasts, curated carefully by professionals. It's the best thing you could ask for to find great programming. I mean, community radio is, and community cable, community media generally, has done some great stuff, and it's really underappreciated.
It is.
You mentioned Pacifica. You want to tell our audience what Pacifica is? And you said it's in 5 other cities?
Well, yeah, there are a total of 5 Pacifica Sisters, we call ourselves. I'd see if I can remember them. New York City, Los Angeles, Berkeley, Houston, and Washington, D.C. is where we have those 5 stations. And we are independent. We are listener supported. There's not one commercial airs on our station. It is not our strength. We depend on listeners to support us. Actually, here in a couple of weeks, Doug, we're going to have another pledge drive on KPFT. Probably going to have one at KBOO about the same time as well, because they tend to coincide pretty close. And the point being, we depend on the listeners so that we don't have corporate support. We don't have government influence. We have nobody telling us what to do. And that's why I've been able to report the unvarnished truth about the drug war, to expose the liars and the bullshit and the evil that this drug war is. There is no benefit to it, and there's no one in government willing to come on my show and say, oh, here's the benefit. There is none.
So you've been doing shows for 22 years, mostly 5 days a week. So what, about 250 shows a year or so? And no government person has ever come on your show to talk about drugs?
Well, not willingly. I've captured their voices, certainly, and put them over the airwaves, but no, never. I one time had a chance to interview a working drug czar. John Walters was in Houston giving a speech, and I recorded the speech. And then when it was over, I walked up to Mr. Walters. My name's Dean Becker. I've been talking to your office all week. Would you give me a few minutes of your time? He looked at me like he wanted to kill me. He stood up, he grabbed his briefcase and started walking out the door. 4 guards gathered around him, said, he doesn't want to talk to you. One reached inside his coat, says, he doesn't want to talk to you. And I left him alone. But that's the closest I ever got to interviewing a drug czar.
They didn't have to threaten to pull out a gun to stop you, right? I don't know. But they're czars, they're autocrats. I don't know how we got a czar in American government, but we've had one since George H.W. Bush started the Office of National Drug Control Policy. So, Doug, you're at KBOO. People on our cable TV system definitely know what KBOO is, but you want to tell the people outside of the area?
Sure. KBOO is community-supported community radio. It's a platform for individuals and voices and perspectives that don't necessarily get the mainstream coverage. It is it's community support. It's part of the Pacifica network. Aside from the 5 stations that Pacifica owns, there's also a network of stations around the country, a few hundred community radio stations of all sorts. KBOO is one. There are we get, I'm sure like KPFT, there's some money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but pardon me, community radio is not NPR. We're a little further to the left on the dial. KBOO is about to start its pledge drive too, actually. I do a show there once a month called Free Culture Radio, which is about drugs, drug cultures, the influence of drugs on society. We talk with I talk with everybody. And Dean's being a little being modest, but we should clarify, federal government officials, they're resistant, but he's certainly made a lot of inroads in the local community, had several shows with the police chief there, the elected district attorney there. I've done shows with that's in Houston, rather, Dean. I'm bigging up my friend over there, because he's got, like I say, he's gotten resistance from the feds, but the other folks, he's locals. He's
certificate from there in Houston. I was born in Harris County, there in Houston, long ago.
Well, I want to kind of respond to what you're saying there, Doug. It is true that there was a time frame where local officials were willing to come on my show. The district attorney still is. She was on just a month ago. She is, I'll just say it, I think she's a legalizer at heart, because if she could, she would not arrest anybody for drugs. I'm certain of that. But I got to reach back maybe 15 years ago. I interviewed the first district attorney. His name was Chuck Rosenthal. About a month later, he got found out for his own drug addiction and resigned. But the Interviews with the police chief and the sheriffs began about 10, 12 years ago, went on for 8 years until they had what they call the Harding Street bust here, which is where the police raided a house with a bad warrant, led to a judge, did all of this stuff. They shot through the walls. They shot each other. They killed the inhabitants and their dog. It was a total shit fest. There's just no getting around it. And
And
since
it
that
happens
point,
all the time, all over the world and the country.
but this was a very example and known and obvious and proven. And what I'm saying is, since that point in time, neither the sheriff or the police chief will come on my show because they know what I'm going to ask them. Is that stuff still going on? And how bad is it still? It's still going on. You're right, Paul. It's never going to stop until we disprove the logic of prohibition as a means of control. Horseshit.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of ending prohibition, Doug is very well versed on the issues regarding what we call Measure 114 that has, is it?
110. You mean 110?
Yeah, 110. 110. I'm sorry. There's so many of them. I didn't work too much on that one. I did sign it, but and so tell us about the impacts of that. I think the real problem with it is that they didn't establish drug consumption places. They set up drug consumption places in Zurich, in Vancouver, without decriminalizing drugs, really. But they were able to dramatically reduce their opiate overdoses and all of that. I know we were talking before the show, Doug, and you said Oregon had one of the lowest OD rates back in 2016, but it changed because of a local gang war.
Fentanyl came into the market around the end of 2019, beginning. We're getting this. It caught up with the rest of the nation. There's been a dramatic rise in overdose deaths over the last really 8-9 years, and we're over 100,000 a year for the last couple of years now, and this is due to toxic drug supply and overdose. It's wrong to just call it overdose because at first, it was a question of contamination, with heroin being contaminated with fentanyl and the other fentanyl analogs, people not getting, as my colleague always says, not knowing what's in that bag. And in some cases, what was in there was way too strong. Now people are actually to the point of being sophisticated enough to, it's about, aware at least, to be able to titrate their dose and to use the fentanyl. They're smoking the stuff. There's a whole change in drug use patterns going on because of this introduction. It's the iron law of prohibition. Our friend Dick Callan came up with years ago that with prohibition, you just have people motivated to make drugs that are stronger and cheaper and more easily smuggled and packing more of a punch. When you had alcohol prohibition, people weren't producing low-powered beer, they were producing high-powered whiskey. And so you have that kind of thing going on here. With Measure 110, you had a decriminalization of simple possession, which gives people, it's less disruptive to people's lives. It's less likely to, people getting released from prison, people getting released from jail are more likely to overdose because their tolerance may be less, depending on how long they've been in there. And there's certainly no treatment available inside. But one of the things it mostly does is help the criminal legal system limp along a little further because that system is broken beyond repair. And it's because of our drug war and the stupid way we enforce things. It's a racist and classist system too. There's so much wrong with what we do and how it works. If it weren't for Measure 110, then you'd have an even more overloaded criminal legal system. Look how we've had Washington County have to release prisoners on early because there are no public defenders available, and that's going on all over the state too. And you want to have more people in the mix? So you want to have the person busted for a small amount of heroin? They'll go in front of a judge instead of let's see, maybe the jerk down the street who broke into your home, because that's the choice you're making here. Do we want to focus your attention on? Look, tourism, whatever. As you mentioned, a safe consumption space. If you want to deal with the question of public drug use, then you create a space where people can go, because they aren't going to stop just because you stand there and act scary. It just doesn't work that way. And so what you have in in fact, in the UK just now, the city of Glasgow, Scotland, has just approved a location for a safe consumption space to open. The chief prosecutor there in Scotland has given the go-ahead. The Home Affairs Committee in the House of Commons recommended it about a month ago. They're moving forward. The UK government doesn't like it, but you know, what's really funny is that drug policy is driving the rift between Scotland and the rest of the UK even wider. If Scotland goes independent because of drug policy, look, I'm just saying it's a possibility, okay?
Yeah, they've been talking about splitting from the United Kingdom. They barely stopped it in a vote, about 6 or 7 years ago, I think.
Yeah,
Dean, did you want to say something there?
Well, I kind of did titrate. You talked about people are now smoking, I guess, the powder or the pills or whatever, instead of ingesting them, and which is a good thing. But what is not given the focus that it deserves is that people ought to have the option of smoking opium, the original natural product that you can titrate much better, much more easily, and without much danger of an overdose whatsoever. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is that everything we do in the drug war is backwards. It's totally opposite of progress, of saving lives, of destroying cartels, of eliminating gangs. It is in place to ensure that this lasts forever. The drug war was declared to last forever, and they want it to last forever because there are millions upon millions of people that make money from this situation.
Including our intelligence agencies. A lot of our intelligence programs, especially the Black Ops ones off the record, are funded by those illegal proceeds.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, massive organizations worth billions of dollars that can move material around the world without hassle from other authorities. If you were a national intelligence agency, if you were some kind of agency dealing with, international kinds of stuff, the CIA, if the CIA wasn't working with some organizations that are involved in drug trafficking, then you should probably fire them and get new bosses at CIA, because they're bigger players than some governments. They're bigger players than some countries. You'd be nuts not to.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
no,
just that's just yeah.
And Doug, along that same line, we do have several proven instances of DEA working with one cartel to provide them weapons, ensure their drugs get through, and another cartel is thwarted and arrested. It's just fucking ugly.
Of course, and you see that filtered. The same thing happens in a different scale in the United States, with police organizations, police departments working with a particular gang member, a particular gang leader, because they think that one's the one that they can work with, because they know they're not going to get rid of everybody. So instead, they pick. They become if not a kingmaker, at least one of the people making the choice in who the bad guys are that run your town.
And doing it quite profitably in most cases. Then those funds are used both personally and for their clandestine operations.
Well, it's politically favorable too. I mean, if you want to have a peaceful demonstration turn into a violent riot, then have a few of your snitches go into the crowd and act like they're part of the demonstration, and then just have them start stuff. And they'll slip away quiet, and nobody will notice because they look just like everybody else. Because, if your hair is long, you must be okay. If you have a bunch of tats, you must be fine if they're the right kind, right? No, does this? Of course this happens. They don't have to be the cops themselves.
Right. No, it's just ugly, as I was saying a minute ago. And look, I want to talk numbers. I like to use these numbers because some people just don't get it, and maybe this will help them to get it. Since 9/11, more than 1 million Americans have been overdosed, dead, because of this prohibition. Over the lifetime of the drug war, the United States has invested, some say at least $1 trillion, some say as much as $3 trillion, trying to stop the flow of drugs. And during that same time frame, I say at least 10 and probably closer to 20 trillion dollars have flowed into the pockets of the terrorists, the cartels, the gangs, the street corner vendor. It is a huge industry. Some say it's $300-600 billion a year. And I guess what I'm saying is, considering the horrors we inflict upon ourselves, I always ask this question: what do we get back? What is the benefit? What makes all of this so necessary? And there is no answer. There never has been, never will be.
It's the centralization of economic and political control. That's what it's about. It's about the centralization of economic and political control by those who benefit.
Yeah, exactly. And they won't admit it on air that they have no legitimacy. And I watch a lot of these First Amendment auditors. I don't know if y'all do, but they're the guys, I consider them patriots. They're out there just holding cameras and looking at buildings, and cops show up and people hate them and they arrest them and they beat them. They've killed them for doing that here in America, where that is legitimate journalism. Any one of us is a journalist if we just carry that camera and report what we find to other people. That is journalism. And these cops are so ignorant that cameras scare them. What are they doing that they fear the transparency? That is all over America. And I submit that it is the drug war that gave legitimacy to this new escalation of these new implementation of these new perceptions, the way they wage their laws out there on the street without any law to back them up.
Well, I remember when they first implemented forfeiture laws back during the early part of Ronald Reagan's first term in office. And that changed the way law enforcement operated. Now they're after me. And I remember here in Portland, for the longest time, they'd look and see if someone had, how much equity someone had in their home, to determine whether they were going to go after them for, growing a few marijuana plants. But that's been it changed the whole dynamic in a very corrupt way. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, it's here in Houston. At one time, I reported, and it was true. We were the world's leading jailer. We were locking up so many people. We were shipping busloads from to Louisiana every morning. I mean, we were the king of arrests. But again, when I started those interviews, it kind of backed down. We're now starting to approach that number again. And I don't know if I'm really addressing your question or not. I forget what you asked.
I didn't really have a specific question there.
All right. But I guess the point being that it all ebbs and flows. It depends who's in power and what they believe and so forth, and how close they want to stick to the Constitution. Because so many of these cops, they've never read it. They swore an oath to it. They don't know what's in it.
Doug, where do you think we are right now in terms of Oregon's progression with Measure 110, and we see a backlash against it now? I guess a business group is trying to change it, but again, there's no talk locally, as far as I can see, about setting up consumption areas with, drug testing and drug treatment and social services. At the same time that people are using these drugs.
Well, the Measure 110 was a direct repudiation of business as usual. So in many respects, it's not surprising that people who do business, who are part of business as usual, were upset. They were opposed to it, before the election, and they're saying the same stuff now. They're using the same arguments now, and you have law enforcement, the criminal legal system, which no longer has an easy body count that they can accrue. Sure, your clearance rates on property and violent crime in the state of Oregon are so abysmal that we stopped collecting them more than a decade ago. Sure, your chance of ever finding the person who really broke into your home or the person who really mugged you, just forget about it. But they could generate a body count by harassing people who might be in possession of small amounts of drugs, or maybe who knows, maybe some residue, maybe it's just a bag of something that looks suspicious. But you were able to do this thing and it made it look like something. In reality, people are out on the street before the booking is finished, and the only thing you've done is rouse somebody and harass them and steal their stuff. With Measure 110, you have less of that, which is good. Police should have time to do, their jobs, but that's up to the police, and they don't really want to do that because that's hard work. Instead, you have money now that's going in. You have the other side is the treatment industrial complex. They want primacy over all this because they have a really cool racket going. People come in, they get counseling, they get this intensive thing, probably works maybe, and it at least until they're out the door, and then they're back in their lives where they were before, and then we're back to the same old stupid cycle. But they had the gravy train out the courts because drug court, boom, these people would come in, and hey, it was a good life. It was good money. Instead, you don't have that gravy train. And this money that's coming in isn't going into these, questionable effective programs. Instead, you're getting things like housing assistance, education, things that people need, right? The counseling, the peer mentoring, the kind of stuff that's actually going to give people hope. People won't recover if they don't think they deserve to recover. People won't recover if they don't think there's hope. So you've got to give them hope, and you've got to give them these. Basically, we're putting finally money into these programs and bypassing part of the Oregon Health Authority. Whoops, Oregon Health Authority dragged its feet and screwed up the handout of money because they were upset because they got slapped in the face too. But the money's finally gotten out. And it is making a huge difference in a lot of lives. And it's proving that Measure 110 worked. And now there's new research that's just come out. Measure 110, we have some of the opponents trying to claim that overdose deaths are all the fault of decriminalization, going on all over the rest of the country where it's still criminalized, but let's not worry about details. New research shows that no impact at all from decriminalization. Again, it just helped the legal system limp along a little further. But the other side of Measure 110 is this money going into really good programs. I mean, it's making a real impact finally. And if we can just keep their hands off of the money and off of this bloody program, then we can maybe keep on making it.
Thank you.
I know you were saying the overdose rate hasn't changed through all of this. It's remained pretty steady.
Well, there was a massive increase there was a great increase actually in around, starting in 2019 and into 2020. And now we're up there with the rest of the country because fentanyl made its way into the marketplace here in Oregon. It really wasn't that prevalent it started to get in here because, well, it's everywhere, but you didn't have the market dominance that you now see. I mean, and that's where the problem is. And you've got contamination with other drugs. You've also got just people using some methamphetamine, but they're also using fentanyl because, well, I don't know, people old enough to remember John Belushi and maybe know what the word speedball means. People still do that. It's called a goofball with methamphetamine and heroin. But goofball sounds bad, so they just call them speedballs. I mean, people have been doing that stuff for decades, and it's still happening. You can see it's tough to titrate your dose, and well, easier when you're smoking. But if people are forced to inject, yeah. What we need are safe places to consume. What we need are a safe supply, safe spaces in which to consume, the decriminalization of people who use drugs, and we need to decolonize our drug policies. And I can talk about the first three of those to just an excruciatingly, painfully long, more time than you have. But well, safe supply. I mean, ultimately that means legal and regulated, right? But safer supply at least means that there's like drug checking services available, like our friends at Outside In that have a GCMS and can actually do drug checking. And places all over the country are doing drug checking. And my friends at Fent Check are trying to get fentanyl test strips in nightclubs and bars and nightlife locations and venues all over, including. They're down in California mostly. They're all over the country. They've got one or two places here in Portland who are carrying the things, and hopefully soon more. I think fentanyl test strips were decriminalized in the last legislature. I need to check on that. But you need safe places to consume, like Insight, like On Point in New York City. My friends at Project Weber Renew in Rhode Island are going to be setting up a space there, and ultimately that's home, right? I mean, privacy of your own space, that's the safest place you can have to consume. So really what we need to do is work on housing. But until we actually get ourselves together enough to care about making sure people are housed, we can at least give them a safe place to consume, right? So safe consumption spaces are a good way to do that.
I want
Go ahead.
to safe consumption spaces, safe drugs. Safe drugs are bought at Walgreens at a reasonable price. Safe place is your home. I see videos of these people. I guess it's called the Kensington neighborhood in Philadelphia. It is a land of zombies. These people are standing on street. They're bent over at the waist. Their heads are pointed to the sidewalk. They're swaying in the breeze. They are high as hell on whatever, I don't know. But my point I'm trying to get at is they're there in block upon blocks, hundreds of people standing there on display. They've been chastised, they've been demonized, they've been cast aside, they have been driven to this sidewalk by society for their quote habit, for their addiction, for their drug use. And apparently the people of Philadelphia care not one whit about these people. They are allowed to stand there and wobble in the breeze. And I guess my point I'm wanting to get to here is that a safe supply means legal drugs made by Merck or Pfizer or Bayer, who invented heroin and provided two drugs at a reasonable price at Walgreens. And they can take it home and use it safely. And there is no demonization. There is no being cast aside for having used it, no more so than we do for those who drink alcohol reasonably. We should learn to judge people by their actions, not by the contents of their pocket, their purse, their bloodstream, or their urine. And that's where we have gone wrong. We have become Salem, a persecutor of witchcraft. That is all this drug war is about. We're persecuting people who do things that we don't approve of, and we're going to punish them until they come around to our side. That is what this is about. This is a persecution of witchcraft. And that is what my forthcoming book is going to be about. It is called Forever Salem, the Inquisition of the Americas.
When is that coming
Before
out,
year
Dean?
end.
Okay, great. So how did you first get involved in drug policy, Dean? Do you want to?
I got arrested
Go
in
ahead.
1968 for 0.023 grams of marijuana. Think about that for a second. That's the tiniest corner of a matchbox of weed. That got me arrested, driven out of the U.S. Air Force, and set my life in that direction. I've been busted 13 times for minor amounts of drugs. I've never gone to prison, been in plenty of jails, many a 30-day sentence behind bars. But my point is, I have never seen, and I bring this up all the time, I've never seen the benefit. I've only seen the horrors, the harms. I've had cops try to stick a 45 up my left nostril because I was agitating them. I was telling them to get the hell out of my house because they didn't have a warrant, but they didn't care. It was Houston. It was about 1970, 71, and they could do anything. They could have shot me and said, oh, he moved, whatever. But the point of it is the drug war is a fabrication. It has no nexus with reality. It's a quasi-religion that people have embraced as if it was going to save lives or do some good, and it has never done any good or saved even one life.
Doug and I are here in Oregon where we have legalized cannabis, and Doug and I moved here to Oregon back in 1984 to work on that. We'll get to that in a minute, but there in Houston and in Texas, they have allowed CBD recently. When I was there a couple of years ago, I saw these CBD stores that had sprung up, and their flowers looked like THC flowers. Is that still going on?
I even had I tried about a year ago to buy the harvest coming out of Oregon for the hemp. I wanted to buy it in bulk, and no one would sell me any because the price had fallen so low. They wanted to sell me individual pre-rolls or something. They didn't want to sell in bulk because there just was no profit to them. But I guess my point I want to bring up is here in Houston, we have a few stores that sell CBD liquids and buds and so forth. But we have gas stations, hundreds of them, that are selling CBD. And you don't know who made it or what's in it. I've talked to Paul Armentano at Normal about this. He says, you don't know how much high metal or it gets into this, what is in there. You don't know. It's just made by Ma and Pa and put in a brown bottle. But my point I'm trying to get to here in Houston, my DA, I was talking about her earlier, she's a legalizer at heart, I believe. When she took office, one of the first things she did was called the Misdemeanor Marijuana Diversion Program. She sent me a copy of it. It was 14 pages. I whittled it down to a page and a half. And what it does, it says if you have 4 ounces or less of marijuana in the city of Houston, you don't get arrested. You don't get taken to jail. They don't tow your car. They write you a ticket. You go to a class. You pay $100 fee if you're a working man, or if you're not working, you don't pay a dime. You take the class and you're free to go smoke pot again and get caught on the streets. She doesn't want to send anybody to jail for weed in this town. And you go to Longview and you get caught with 1 vape cartridge, they're going to want $50,000 for the fine on that thing before they'll let you out of jail. So it varies widely in this state.
That's amazing. So if you're in Longview with a CBD flower,
No,
not a
THC.
Just THC, but a CBD flower is okay. And it's a pretty expensive test, and a lot of these places don't have the money to do those tests. Is that correct?
That's true. My DA talked about that. A couple of interviews ago, I talked to her about that. She said, yeah, Dean, you should be an attorney because that's true. They're not going to be able to afford to do it, and you can challenge them in court all day long.
Yeah. It's anybody just has to say it's CBD, whether it is or isn't, and you'll at least have an out if you're going into the court system.
Right.
Is there any movement in Texas toward legalization now that New Mexico, Colorado, you've got medical?
There's what they call themselves Texas Normal. It's a few corporate types that have a job ensuring that marijuana prohibition lasts forever. I mean, that's what I see out of it. They have no, they're women, but they have no balls either way. I'm sorry, they just don't. They don't have any courage, motivation, the willingness to expose these politicians, to embarrass them, to belittle them for their lack of knowledge or for the implications that they're involved in the criminal enterprises in the first place. The whole point being there is no real momentum in Texas. No, I offered to volunteer to give them a pep talk, and I got banned from their Facebook and from all interactions. They don't want to change things in Texas.
Well, change is coming one way or another. You know, back in the day, Normal had a relatively positive impact when we were first decriminalizing in the 70s. There was a breakup there around Jimmy Carter's drug czar. We won't go into that. But I first contacted Normal and got a letter back from Kevin Zeese, who is the executive director now. Then he's passed away here a few years ago now. But he was a great guy, great lawyer, worked on a lot of different freedom issues after that, including starting the Drug Policy Foundation, which is now the Drug Policy Alliance. But I was involved with Normal when I came to Oregon. And Doug, I know you were involved with Iowa Normal to some degree when you first came to Oregon. Let's flash back to that period of time when we were both in our early 20s, I might add, when we came here. And was 84 your first time to come and work with John Sajo and the whole gang?
I got it out here to work on the initiative. You know, it was summer. I was at the University of Iowa. I had started a chapter at the University of Iowa in the fall of '83, and met up with an old yippie who happened to be there in school, and well, you know, we went to DC in November of '83 for the National Normal Conference, and for a rally, went with a bunch of folks from the other school and the other school in Iowa. There are only 2, you know. There are more than 2. Anyway, we went. I kind of date my involvement from everything from then. So I hate to put a timestamp on this, but I'm a month away from 40 years of drug policy work. Met Sandy Burbank at the Normal Conference in November of '83. We're activist meeting on Sunday before everybody left. I'm sitting next to Sandy, and there's Dana Beal sitting across from me. I'm a green kid from Iowa who is about 2 weeks from my 21st birthday. And then, the next summer I'm out there working with Sandy and John and all the rest. And I remember calling my friend Jack Clubb, not shortly after I got here in '84, It's like, yeah, they're really nice folks. They're really nice. I said, they're really, why are they really nice? What is this? They feel really welcome. I don't understand. And because I had some issues, but I did, and yeah, it was life changing.
Mhm. So yeah, we both worked on putting marijuana legalization on the ballot. It was on the ballot for a day in 1984 at the order of Norma Paulus. We were just talking about this last week with Mark Harrer, but then Norma Paulus took it back off, and so we started up the campaign for the petition drive in '85 and made it in record time. I'm sure that's still the earliest any initiative signature gathering campaign is qualified for the ballot.
We were strongly motivated. We got through. I mean, I got here just as literally got into the state just as the legislature was passing some election law reforms that were based on the Supreme Court case that we had worked on the summer before. I mean, after the petitioning, I stayed on and worked with Alan Silver and Michael Rose on that Supreme Court case. Doing all the typing, it was so much fun. Fast. And so yeah, in '85 we get here. The rules were a little more clear. The county clerks could not just randomly remove people from the voting lists because they didn't like the petition they had just signed. I mean, you do that to people all the time, but I think when you do that to someone like Marilyn Wilson, who was the co-owner of Solaflex at the time, heads are going to roll. You know, that's I mean, our case was true. Our case was correct, but it did help that the state and the counties kind of messed over a lot of people who really like solid members of the community, solid party members. You know, that was just icing on the cake. Oh, it was. I think you're right.
Yeah, I was with Deborah Arthur, and we served a lot of the different county elections offices for that writ of mandamus and the legal surroundings in 1984. And then Jack Harrer moved here at the same time. So we formed kind of a super group, so to speak, in drug policy, but it broke up after a while.
But that was a shining moment. Jack working on his first edition of The Emperor. You remember that first one with the yellow cover? He's complaining, they got the pages. It was supposed the faces facing were supposed to be opposing, and it was and then the next one, the real edition comes out, and oh my God. I mean, heady days, man, heady days.
It's amazing that he's world renowned for that now. He's known around the world and is kind of an icon. A lot of people think he was a pot grower himself just because of that strain out there named after him. But after that, though, Doug, you went to work at Normal in Washington, D.C. And I came and visited you a few times during the National Normal conferences. In fact, I was arrested for marijuana at the United States Capitol while I was staying at your house. So I think you came and got me out of jail one day.
It was, we had a few times. There were, okay.
That was
one time we're coming back on. We got a bus to bring people because there were so many. We're a motorhome, I guess, and there was a demo down at the Capitol, and so we're driving back up to the Nut House, and we get pulled over by park police, which is a little weird, but whatever. And they come up, and it's like, all right, look. We've been watching you all day. We can smell it, the smoke's rolling out. You're all done. But if 3 of you volunteer to come with us to act as test subjects for a drug recognition expert demonstration, then everybody gets to go. And to my everlasting shame, I did not volunteer. But Debbie Goldsberry, Monica, and I think Maria, all 3 said yes, and so those 3 went off and were test subjects for the park police and drug recognition expert demonstration.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't think I've told that story before. So
I don't think I've heard that story before. That's fascinating. I didn't. I was arrested there in '89, and earlier this year, I got a pardon from President Biden for simple possession of marijuana there in Washington, D.C. So, and I got another one for possession of marijuana in my house. They tried to convict me of cultivation, which I basically, we didn't call any witnesses, but came out that I was facing 10 years. And I have a book about jury nullification that the police introduced as evidence. But in the end, I was just convicted of simple possession in that case. I would have done 10 years for taking it to trial. They offered me 5, but because of they just found me guilty. The judge just found me guilty of simple possession, which stopped a retrial in a hung jury case, really. And so I got a pardon on that too. So I have 2 pardons now from President Biden. So,
Brother, I got to
there
say,
you have it.
you are probably one of the only people I know who could get the police to introduce jury nullification into a court case.
That was it. They didn't know they were introducing jury nullification. It's interesting that the prosecutor in that case has now had me. He retired after 20 years. He gave me some of the swag from his office, like a little medallion that they gave him when he retired. And I was a witness for a couple other marijuana cases that he defended against. And he's even made a significant donation to our cause to help us keep the doors open. So I guess he feels a little guilty about it. I showed him the pardon when it came out last March.
Can I chime in here about normal?
Please do.
Okay, first off, I want to just say my name is not Gamzee. I don't know where that comes from. Secondarily,
that's not on TV.
well, okay, and then secondarily, normal. I want to talk about normal just for a second. I consider Paul Armentano to be such a knowledgeable, intelligent, wonderful advocate for ending this prohibition. I really do. I think normal has been very instrumental. My discussion a while ago about the Texas normal is about the Texas normal only. Okay, I didn't mean to disparage the national organization at all. And I guess that's basically what I wanted to pitch right there.
Good. So, Dean, you continue to produce it's 5 days a week, your show there in Houston?
And Doug and I each produce, well, currently I'm producing a 1-hour show that I then chop into a half-hour show and call Cultural Baggage. So that's 2 shows right there. Doug produces Century of Lies for the Drug Truth Network. I also produce 7 weekly, daily, 420 Drug War News. They're little 3-minute sections of these other programs that other stations then include at news time or, include within their news segments or whatever. And I guess the point I'm getting at here is you add them all together, that's 10 per week at this point. My website actually tallies. It doesn't have the original, I think, 300 that I produced, but it's currently showing we have over 9,000 of these shows that Doug and I have produced thus far.
And 1,165 was a lot, but that's okay.
When I hit 10,000, I might quit. I don't know. I'm 75 years. In about 10 days, I'll be 75 years old. Maybe 10,000 shows is enough. If I haven't influenced people enough to pull their heads out of their posteriors to end this stupidity, well, I probably never will. But I'm going to go to 10.
Big impact, Dean. Do not minimize your impact by putting this information out there on a global basis. Though you might not have changed a lot there in Houston. You're in the belly of the petrochemical beast. I mean, we all remember Gatewood Galbraith, and we know his famous phrase, which was right on. I couldn't let it die with him when he passed back in 2012. It's the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate, elite, fascist, sons of a bitches. And we all know the petrochemical industry is based largely there in Houston, if not Saudi Arabia.
Well, I got to say this. Part of my reviewing of these First Amendment auditors, there's a lot that goes on out at those petrochemical compounds out along the highways, and they hire Houston police at $80 an hour to stand out there and protect them. And so they support Exxon more than the Constitution. They support, Mobil more than the Constitution. They're going to arrest you, beat you, and throw you in a cage if you're standing near those compounds.
Well, I keep some hemp plastic, hemp tinsels that are made out of biodegradable hemp plastic here, we could solve so many problems with pollution and species extinction. We have some hemp wood here that's stronger than, and I've had the manufacturer on a couple of years ago. And, as we learned largely from Jack Hare and others, it's been changing. It can change the world, and we desperately need it to do so. So, Doug, your shows with the Prison Pipeline Cooperative, we're about out of time here. Let me have you give us a plug. Where can we go online to find more information?
Sure. In fact, Prison Pipeline airs every Monday on KBOO 90.7 FM in Portland. Hope you can include that. Gosh. Anyway, it's a brilliant show. It's a brilliant show. I'm one of the co-hosts. It's you find it at the KBOO website, kboo.fm. I also host a show called Free Culture Radio, which airs once a month on KBOO, third Wednesday of the month. Also in the 6:30 to 7 time slot. It's about drugs, drug cultures, the influence of drugs on society. I talk about everything from tea to THC, from speed to heroin to alcohol-free beer. Because drugs are drugs, and people who use drugs are basically, well, it's everybody. We just need to get over this ridiculous thing about harassing and persecuting some of the people who use certain banned substances. It's so yeah. The fact that radio stations are willing to put out information, weed podcasts are everywhere, and podcasts are great. Anybody with a computer can make one, and they usually do. But when you're actually on a broadcast schedule, that does mean that there are some people paying attention to the stuff that you're saying, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Yeah. I'll shut up now.
All right. Well, thank you, Doug. So, Dean, where can people look for the Drug Truth Network and cultural baggage and everything?
Okay. Currently, they can find those 9,500 whatever shows at drugtruth.net, Drug Truth Network, drugtruth.net. The shows are aligned: Cultural Baggage, Century of Lies, 420. We do some video we call, I can't remember, Moral High Ground or something like that. And I guess what I'd like to really say is that by that, I mean, not just us three, every person in America, every person on this planet owns the moral high ground. Don't be afraid to challenge these politicians. They have nothing. They will run from you. They cannot defend this war, this eternal war on our rights. The KPFT is my main radio station, one of the 5 sisters, as I said. That's at kpft.org. That's where you can find the Moral High Ground 1-hour shows. They're all stored there. Doug and I, we store all our shows, Cultural Baggage, Century of Lies, and the 420 Drug War News are all stored at the AudioPort site, which is a storage site for independent producers around the country where they share their radio programs with one another. And that's at audioport.org, I believe. But in general, look for the book coming out, Forever Salem. We're going to scald everybody. We're going to cuss them all out real good.
Well, when the book comes out, we'll have you back on, and we'll get a plug out there for it for sure. And Doug, I want to get you back on with Sejo and Fred Orther and, revisit our glory years back then at some point. If we can ever convince Sejo.
I'm in. Name the day.
Sounds good. So I've had Doug McVay here in Portland, Dean Becker in Houston, Texas. I want to thank you for coming on. Keep up your great work and restore hemp. Good night.